I think it is clear to believe in the power of ideas.
Fresh thinking to the Manhattan Institute.
The city, up to 1993, and for about 20 or 30 years, had been described as ungovernable.
If you had asked me 20 or 25 years ago if it would be possible to cut in half the rate of crime in big cities, the rate of welfare dependencies in big cities, I would have answered you rapidly and without hesitation with a resounding no.
15 years ago, the national news weeklies were running cover stories saying the rotting of the Big Apple and the death of America's cities.
It was a terrible front cover. To have a society change like that, there needs to be a lot of work that's done to lay a basis for that, and the Manhattan Institute did all that work.
Markets work, that free markets work, that the ability for the marketplace in one form or another to help decide how to allocate resources is a lot better than a government authority.
Two central rules of the Manhattan Institute are that markets work and morality matters.
Our goal is to influence the influential. There's a group of people who really are the people that are passionate and committed to expanding the public conversation.
Manhattan Institute is doing a great job and promoting ideas in places where they might not reach otherwise. That is, reaching the media people, the intellectuals, to some extent the academics, who in turn influence great numbers of other people. And I think that's an enormously important role to play.
Conservatives have always been pretty good on guns and money. But what conservatives were not so good at until the Manhattan Institute came along were the quality of life issues and the issues of poverty, of compassion, of faith, of education. Those were all, and still remain to a large extent, issues associated with liberalism.
What you want to do is persuade people of your ideas, whether they're Democrats or Republicans or men on the moon.
It's often said that the Manhattan Institute has the advantage of not being in Washington, so we don't have beltwayitis. Instead of thinking about, do we have this many votes in the House to pass this, and otherwise it's just pie in the sky thinking, we can actually think about ideas, not whether something is votable on, but if it'll work.
Politicians have learned from Manhattan Institute, and in fact some politicians who wouldn't recognize the name Manhattan Institute if they saw it in front of them, and who are not consciously aware of the organization, they have been infected by ideas that have been spread by Manhattan Institute publications.
Manhattan Institute always came in being sophisticated, being urban, loving the city. You look at the City Journal, the first thing you notice is how beautiful a magazine it is, how much fun it is to experience it sensually. And cities are about sensual pleasure.
The most famous example of a direct causal relationship between the Manhattan Institute's principles and public policy would be the famous broken windows approach to policing neighborhoods and crime.
Fixing broken windows said that you had to pay attention to those things, that in ignoring them, you were creating the mega problems that were being used almost as an excuse for not dealing with the smaller problems.
And those ideas have now been incorporated into the way many cities now manage crime. That success alone would make the Manhattan Institute of historic importance.
The Manhattan Institute supported Peter Huber. His thinking was so advanced on what was going on in the world of lawsuits that when I, as a consumer reporter, saw it, it was as if the nickel drop into the machine. But the unintended consequences of the lawsuits and the junk science behind them, I had begun to suspect and feel, but Peter Huber put it all into words. And then came Walter Olson, writing even more brilliant prose about lawsuit abuse. Yes, that's right. Somebody really understands this.
There's hope for reform when a high-quality, scholarly-oriented organization like Manhattan Institute is applying its talents and skills to the effort. And if we're serious about reform in our civil justice system, this is a horse to bet on.
Data, real data. It's the best thing about Manhattan Institute. It finds, uncovers, and brings forth real facts. Everybody's got an opinion. Manhattan Institute is very good about getting facts.
Welfare reform would not have happened without Charles Murray's book, Losing Ground, 20 years before. We forget, if you read Byron Magnet's book, The Dream and the Nightmare, we had people saying welfare was good for people. And now the whole frame of debate has shifted.
The Manhattan Institute is able to study great public problems in America, find out the facts of those public problems, and then come up with ways to help redress them in a practical way that actually can be achieved within the political framework.
Manhattan Institute, I think, was the first to focus on accountability in public education, and that public education had turned into a vast, unaccountable monopoly, which is the worst kind of monopoly.
We see now that New York is a better city for the Manhattan Institute's work, and we see that other cities are as well. The city can be a place that's a joyful place to live, not a place that's a grim place to live.
The Manhattan Institute, over the last 25 years, given a limited budget, given heroic work by very few people, has achieved a tremendous number of successes, which is to really say that this idealistic notion that ideas matter is really true.
The budget, although it's grown fivefold since I've been around, is still relatively modest by standards. And I always think we get more bang for the buck than any think tank around. And I think that's a lesson of keeping the group small, the ideas big, and the overhead low. And that's a pretty good recipe for success in almost anything.
Manhattan Institute has bridged the gulf between idea and action with less fanfare, but more sheer effectiveness than any other think tank in our American history.
All think tanks are not created equal. The Manhattan Institute has clearly stepped out ahead of others, made itself heard more than others, created more change than others have done or could have hoped to do.
As the mayor, who became mayor in order to reform the city and presided over the city during this transformation, I could not have done it without the Manhattan Institute.
I think it is clear how fortunate we are to believe in the power of ideas.
Supply the common sense and the fresh thinking of the Manhattan Institute.